Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NetApp On Air. As always, I am your host, Nick Howell. Thank you for joining us again during this special launch week here at NetApp. Yesterday, if you missed it, we did a full breakdown of all of the pieces of hardware that came out yesterday morning. We talked about the new entry and mid-range A-series systems, the updates to the C-series platforms. We talked about storage grid. We talked about E-series. So for those of you that have been after me for the last year to get updates on storage grid and E-series, go back and watch that one because we did. We brought it to you. We're going to have those guys back probably first of the year after the holidays to do full deep dives on the whole portfolios around storage grid and E-series. So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed here to the channel because we have got a full slate of episodes for the rest of the year lined up for you guys. As we started a couple of weeks ago, we started getting back to some 101 stuff after Insight. We talked about Snap Drive, Snap Vault, Snap Lock, all of those. And then we brought in our guest and talked about Snap Center. We brought in Artie, I couldn't remember his name. There was Artie Noel to talk about Snap Center and go over that. I can't wait to try the new version of Snap Center myself. It looks incredible, and I was really genuinely impressed with it. But you guys have been waiting for this one. You guys know what's coming. You guys have been asking me in DMs and in private, like, when are we going to talk about ONTAP? When can we talk about the new ONTAP? When's ONTAP going to be talked about? Guys, he's here, finally. We finally have him back. Mr. Keith Aasen is back on the show. Keith, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Nick. Thanks for having me back. It's been a bit.
We are. I think we've missed you, number one, and I think there was anticipation leading up to Insight a couple of months ago to have you on to go over when the 916 stuff was sort of trickling out there initially, and then we did some sort of NDA style kind of briefings at Insight to sort of let people start into it, but. With the launch yesterday, now we are ready. It's out in the open. The things that were holding us back are no longer holding us back. We can talk about it openly and give everybody all the details. So for the next hour, we're going to talk about ONTAP, folks. Strap in, grab a drink. Keith, what was the original reason that was there an explanation behind like why we were sort of keeping things close to the vest?
Yeah, it was a few, right? Insight was a bit earlier this year, which presented some challenges, right? We were just kind of in the final QA stretch of 9.16.1, but as you know, when you're doing that, you can find things. Things could change, right? Something could be delayed. So what we don't want to do is talk about something that doesn't actually make the final cut. But Insight is such a big event. It's the one time we get together with so many customers and partners, and it's so key to have that face-to-face. So we had to share, but it was a bit of an awkward time because it wasn't quite ready. Plus, the other thing is a huge element of what's in 9.16.1 was all of the development, all of the support for those hardware platforms that you guys covered yesterday. And we couldn't talk about those hardware platforms until yesterday. So that was the other big thing was like there's kind of a big hole there that we weren't allowed to talk about. So it was a challenge. It was a bit awkward. I also have to apologize that I was in your hometown of Vegas and didn't get to actually talk to you. We walked by while you were on air, but it just never happened. It was such a chaotic time. So next year, my friend, we'll make sure it happens.
Absolutely. And just from my perspective, like, I don't know that I actually attended the event. I feel like I sat at the desk for most of the time. Like, we spent 6 months prepping for all that, and it's gone in 2.5 days. And it was like, whoa, what just happened? Oh, my God. And we have hours and hours of content to work through. So it's definitely an interesting change of bringing the show to the show and doing a show within a show. And I guess is the best way to put it, but yeah, we learned some good lessons, good and bad, and some things we're going to change for next year, and very excited to do it all again. We may even make it bigger next year. So we'll have plenty of more time, plenty of more slots, plenty of more ONTAP and hardware stuff to geek out about. But today we're talking about ONTAP 9.16. Where do we start with 9.16, Keith? Like, let me go ahead and pull your thing up here so we can start talking through it. Because I know there's a ton of stuff to cover, guys, so bear with us if we go a smidge long today, but I want to really get into this because I know people have been waiting for it, and I kind of want to ignore the clock and just make sure we cover as much as we possibly can here. So where do we start with 9.16.1? What were sort of the big tenets of 9.16?
Well, there's some big features. We're going to talk about that. But before we talk about the features, I don't want to undersell the support for all that crazy new hardware that you saw yesterday. And It's one of the things where you go, yeah, it supports new platforms, and it's such a funny little bullet where it says, it's one little phrase supports these new platforms. But what that doesn't capture is all of the engineering effort that ONTAP does. These are still engineered appliances, so it's not a matter of just going, yeah, we support this new hardware. It's a matter of tuning ONTAP and optimizing it for the new componentry that's actually in those platforms. And so first thing is you can't discount the incredible level of effort that the team puts in to really tune and optimize ONTAP for that new infrastructure. So I think Chris did a great job of sharing with you. We're really excited with some of the performance capabilities of these new systems. They are mind blowing. So it's not been trivial. It's been a ton of work to get ONTAP optimized for that. But that's just stability and performance that's an availability that happens with those new platforms. But let's talk about features, some of the new things that are in there. Gosh, I don't know where do we begin. How about we plug tomorrow's show a little bit? We can kind of give you a taster. And again, you're doing this 3 days in a row, which is pretty impressive. But some major enhancements to autonomous ransomware protection. Probably one of the best adopted features we've done recently. The timing on that could have been better. We sort of had this feature developed right when ransomware was really hitting headlines, and it's been incredibly adopted over the last 14, 16 months. And it's time for a bit of a refresh with it, right? It's done an incredible job for protecting customers from ransomware attacks. But 9.16.1 is a pretty major refresh to the underlying technology that's there, and kind of two major ways. One, rather than being more of a static model, this one continues to learn as you give it feedback about how it's doing protecting your environment. And what that translates into is better protection, faster protection, but most notably a lot less noise, right? Lot less false positives. It starts to learn what's normal for your environment and when something unusual is happening. And as an administrator, as much as you can bring that noise down, the better you're going to be able to react to when an actual attack occurs.
I really want to hit on this because, and I hope I'm not burying the lead, but we announced that SE Labs, like one of the preeminent testing places out there, gave us a 100% precision score and a 99% recall. Is that what you're highlighting here on the screen?
Because that's what I meant. And as a tech guy, that 100% is always gives me anxiety because it's nothing's ever 100%, but that's what that's referring is that independent test, which was, in their scenario, they had no false positives during that test process. And we're able to, ever since we announced ARP, we've always had that greater than 99% detection rate. So that's always been very high. But what this version has really done is lower that noise level, reduce the false positives.
Wonderful. And I will say, when did we introduce the first sort of iteration of ARP? It was like 9.12?
Actually 9.10.
9.10.
9.10.1 was when it first introduced.
So for people that I guess my question is I know we had this new iteration of it with ARP AI. People that are using 9.10 or maybe stuck back on 9.12, something like that. Will it be retroactive to those older systems that might be running that stuff, or is there anything in the newer systems or this newer ARP AI that it sort of requires more modern hardware?
Absolutely not. That's the beautiful thing, is just doing the ONTAP upgrade, this automatically the new model gets applied. And so there's nothing to be done. There's no settings, no changes. Just as you do that, the new model gets loaded. And we've taken it. This is item number 2 we've done, is we've made it modular. So what I mean by that is, previously in this scenario, in order to get this new model, you do need to upgrade to whatever version you're on, up to 9.16.1, right? So you had to do that ONTAP upgrade, and you may want to do it for this particular feature, but we know that doing an ONTAP upgrade often involves a lot of checking. There's a lot of homework involved to make sure you're ready for that particular upgrade. But in the case of ransomware, you may want a newer model urgently, right? Maybe there's a new type of ransomware that comes out that we haven't thought of before that ONTAP, we need to retrain ONTAP to react to. Hasn't happened, by the way, since we've done this. We haven't had to do an emergency retrain of our internal models. But let's say there was. 9.16.1 introduces the ability that we could publish and release a new AI model that could detect without you having to do an ONTAP upgrade. And that's huge, right? That's a way that you could very quickly react and defend your systems without having to go through your normal process of doing an ONTAP upgrade.
But you still have to get to 9.16 before you can start taking advantage of that iterative update, definitions
Correct.
update?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Good
Prior
to
to
know.
that,
So guys, pay attention. I know there's a lot of you that like to be laggards and hang back a release or two, like that, to take advantage of it. Like, make sure that you're getting some of the latest and greatest, because as Keith just said, like previously we were updating the definitions for attacks via the ONTAP updates. To get the iterative updates without having to update it, you do have to get to 9.16. I just want to I know I'm being a little pedantic, but I want to make sure that that's heard loud and clear, that you have to get to 9.16 first before you can turn that on, right?
That absolutely correct. Now, admittedly, 9.16.1 was out. It's out now as of yesterday in RC. So, you want to do that accordingly. But some good news I'll share, because I know historically we've always had a tough time getting people on newer versions of ONTAP. Looking at the data, actually, 9.15.1 is, compared to where it is with other releases, is actually ramping much, much faster than any of our previous releases. And so that's a really good indication that people are getting into that habit of upgrading or staying on a newer version. And that's really, that's really exciting, because it's when we build this stuff, it's exciting to release it out into the world, and it's more exciting to see people actually use it, and not having to wait a year or 18 months before people start using it. It's exciting to see people using it earlier and earlier.
Nice. Is making the process easier? Are you seeing as far as whether it's system manager or whatever, the update process being even more non-disruptive and being easier at one button click sort of thing? Is that, hey, look at there. I'm reading I guess what I'm asking is, are you seeing those improvements shorten that time frame that people take to upgrade?
I think it's a few things. It's definitely making it easier, and it's not just what we're doing in ONTAP. Check out some of the new things that they're doing in Blue XP, as far as being able to download the image centrally and then distributing it to the various systems. Definitely, we are doing things in ONTAP systems to make that upgrade more seamless, more predictable. One of the things, for example, is all these new hardware platforms that we've released starting back in May. They all now will do an ONTAP upgrade with a single reboot, right? So think about that. When you do an ONTAP upgrade, historically we might need as many as 3 reboots, and so you'd reboot the system, and if there's a new BIOS or firmware, we would apply that and do a reboot. And then if any of your I/O cards had new drivers or firmware, we'd have to apply that to get to the I/O cards. And then we do a final reboot to actually apply the new version of ONTAP. Now with 9.16.1, all of these new platforms we've released, all will do it in a single reboot. And what that does is it drastically shortens the time to do that upgrade. And kind of in the neighborhood of high 60s to 70% reduction in time. And that just means your upgrades are faster. You're in a HA state, or a failed over HA state, in a much shorter window. So less risk to the upgrades, much easier to do.
Fantastic. So, I mean, it's more reason to get upgraded.
And we're not done. There's a lot more things we can do. 9.16.1 also does a better job of doing pre-validation checks. So we realize that your change window, your upgrade, really starts when you start doing those pre-validation checks. As much as we can shorten that time, that's less time as you as an administrator, typically in an off hour, having to watch these upgrades actually occur. So we're doing a lot to not only make the checks more thorough, but also more timely in their manner, and just making the whole upgrade process as simple as possible. And that's both ONTAP as well as our partner products like Blue XP.
Yeah, and I look at it, the more you can tell me as an admin before I reboot the system and there's a failure on boot because of the upgrade and I have to fail back, the more you can tell me in that pre-check validation, pre-upgrade validation, the better. Because then I can go, whoa, there's some other things I got to address here.
Yep.
Bail out. Pull the ripcord. Nope, we're not doing it right now. And then I can go fix those things over the next week or two and then come back and find it during my next window. So the more of that kind of stuff, the better. Because I think too often times people they kick off the upgrade, reboot the system, reboot the node, and it doesn't boot up. And you're just like, okay, what do I do now? Now you're manually reloading a previous version from the loader prompt and trying to figure out how to get the node back online on the previous. it's a mess. So yeah, more of this, please. Anything
Well,
we can do to help admins.
and even taking it off box. So even if everything
Yeah.
on the ONTAP system is checking out, we're trying to get ONTAP being more aware of its environment, right? It doesn't. There are times when issues arise. Not that there's an issue in the new version of ONTAP, but something about the new version of ONTAP doesn't play nice with the network configuration or ecosystem that the ONTAP system is placed into. And so trying to get more awareness into how it actually is configured and connected to the client systems, and be able to make smarter decisions or warn you about potential issues during the upgrade.
Wonderful. We had a question come in about SVM migrate, but I'll hold that one for the time being.
We'll talk about some new SVM migrate stuff.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
What about maybe another good segue as we're talking about hardware, and this might be a repeat. Hopefully everybody watched the episode from yesterday. But the other thing is, at Insight we launched the new ASA, but ONTAP 9.16.1 also really is a kind of a fast follow for some really exciting new features for that ASA. First off, supporting a tremendous increase in the number of LUNs in an HA pair. So I tell you, there's a very few, very, very small number of customers that will ever push 10,000 LUNs on an HA pair. But ONTAP's there, right? It's a checkbox that sometimes comes up in requirements documents, and it's good to know you can get that if you need to. And in the first iteration of the new ASA platforms, they were HA pair only, and now we're adding back in that scale out capability that ONTAP's been known for and is really unique in that block market, and the ability to go up to 12 nodes or 6 HA pairs. That's a huge add-on as well.
Which really makes some of the ONTAP features sing from a clustering perspective that we were missing before, if I'm being blunt and honest. When it was just an HA pair, you were if you went from a system that was multi-node, multi-pair cluster of like a FAS or an AFF, and now you're coming back to an ASA to do SAN, you might be missing out on some of those things. Well, with 9.16.1, you get them back, and it's totally awesome.
Yeah, the ability to just distribute workloads and do really seamless tech refreshes is a big one, right? The ability to just add nodes, move workloads, eject them. Those sort of workflows are back. And as you said, if you're used to that in unified ONTAP, it's a huge addition to have that in ASA.
I'm very interested in the NVMe active pathing.
Yep.
That kind of stuff is where I see us moving ahead quite a bit. I don't see many other storage vendors doing near as much with NVMe as we are over the last year or so. They like to talk about it. It's a lot of vaporware, but the implementations that we've done across the board, from the disks to the pathing to everything, is really fantastic. Anything stand out for you with NVMe?
Well, the DLK is one that we know we had a lot of back pressure for, right? That was, I totally agree with you on the pathing. We're leading a bunch. The DLK was rose in demand pretty strongly, and even just using NVMe as a transport protocol, as you probably noticed, the last 12 months has spiked, right? Yeah. Prior to that, it was something that we were sort of waving the flag on. Hey, this is really cool, and it really wasn't being adopted. And something changed like 12 months ago.
The cloud.
It just flipped, right?
I think I called it here on the show, actually. I said, or maybe it was one of my videos I made, I said, the second the public cloud that starts to adopt NVMe over TCP using existing Ethernet, it's going to hockey stick. And I think it has.
It did.
I think there's a resurgence of Block's going through a renaissance right now, but there's all of this existing high-speed Ethernet sitting around, peanut butter and jelly. And it's just going to skyrocket from here.
The other thing that might have happened too is NVMe is very CPU efficient.
Yes.
And with some changes in certain vendors' licensing models, saving some from front-end CPU can actually result in some big dollars as well. So I think that's another one. We're seeing a lot of migration of VM workloads from iSCSI to NVMe TCP.
Yes.
Yeah. So some big enhancements that for ASA customers just made it that much sweeter, right? Already really powerful from a hardware standpoint, but some major enhancements from a software standpoint.
First question I'm going to pull up here for you,
sure.
Considering it's related to NVMe, is SnapMirror ActiveSync with NVMe over TCP. Is that ready for 9.16.1 on the ASAs? We are going to have Jeff Steiner on here in a couple weeks, beginning of December. So maybe that's a better question for him. I don't know.
I may defer mostly to him. However, if I can throw my slide back on the screen, bottom right bullet,
There you go.
SnapMirror ActiveSync. Now, the question though is combined with NVMe over TCP. That's the wild card. I'm not entirely certain on there. There's a lot of moving parts in that rather simple question, but I might need to defer to on that as far as if all those pieces go together.
So, high note, mark your calendar, December 4th. I don't have it posted yet, scheduled yet, but we're going to have Mr. SnapMirror ActiveSync himself, Jeff Steiner, here on the show to go over all of that stuff. So,
and while we're talking about ActiveSync,
yes,
let me throw in an announcement.
I love how we keep leading into each of these slides organically,
which is support for node. Now this is what's super unique. There are other vendors that do have synchronous active cross-site replication, but they're locked to two node, right? HA pairs only. The ability that we can combine scale out and still have cross-site active LUN pathing really opens up two really interesting things. One, just from a scalability standpoint, if you have a really demanding workload, you can do that across 4 nodes, just distribute that workload. But probably more interesting is this really introduces the way to have very low risk tech refreshes. Right? If your workload is that critical, you want that LUN on 2 sites and be read-writable on both sites, that thing's probably pretty important. And therefore, when you're doing a tech refresh, you want to minimize risk. You don't want to have a scenario where for a period of time, it's not available. So this introduces a means that you can do a tech refresh and never sacrifice your availability at any point in that tech refresh.
So I might be exposing my ignorance here, but when we were just talking about doing like multi-node upgrades and things like that and how that's been enhanced over time. Have we gotten to the point where we can sort of put a controller into maintenance mode VMware style and evacuate any LUNs or SVMs that are on it over to other systems? Have we gotten that automated yet?
Yeah, you can certainly do that. Now, the best thing is that sort of happens automatically though. When you're doing your upgrade, ONTAP will do that. It'll shuffle load around in order to facilitate that. So yeah, you can do it, but typically that happens as part of you may ever hear NetAppers refer to ANDU, and ANDU is automatic non-disruptive upgrades, right? And that's a whole workflow that we use to essentially just to evacuate a node and facilitate the failover, and it should always be non-disruptive. What we're kind of referring to here, though, is the ability to leave your HA pair intact, add another HA pair, and non-disruptively move the workload to the other HA pair. So not at no point, not only am I offlining a LUN from one site to the other, I am also never in a scenario where I'm actually not in an HA scenario on either site. So really maintaining that high availability on both locations.
Lovely. Love it. Lots of questions coming in, but they're not timely just yet. So I'm gonna keep stockpiling them over there until the right time comes. Keep them coming in, guys. I see all your questions coming in. Thank you for it.
Talking about clarifications, I do want to call out that NVMe deallocate. I said there's some back pressure in there, and I do want to call out that's not just for the ASA. That is for all of our platforms. So if you're running VMware on Unified or even FAS, you do get that deallocate capability. That's across all the platforms.
Beautiful. And I see the thing down at the bottom. Selfishly, one of the things I've been anticipating the most is the TLS offload cards modules that we're going to be adding to the newer systems. Talk to me about how we've gotten through that with ONTAP, because that's typically any kind of encryption activity is going to be very heavy and CPU intensive. And how have we made the transition to offload cards along with ONTAP, leveraging those offload cards?
Well, I do want to call out, so the feature we're talking about here is software based. So it can be turned on. But to your point is that will generate load on both sides, right? Encryption just requires calculations, and so there is load. But we want to make sure that it was available for people that had that as a key requirement. Now, subsequent to that, we're also introducing, you said, offload cards. For these new hardware platforms, we have new cards available that will do the offloading of that for you. And that's actually both TLS and IPsec. So hardware offloading isn't it funny, Nick, if you kind of think back through the years, the rise and fall of hardware offload cards? Like, You
Yeah.
know, I remember there being an iSCSI hardware offload card,
Yeah.
and a number of different things. But encryption is one of those things that's just mathematically challenging. It means it takes a lot of CPU cycles, and it just really lends itself to offloading cards. So it's something that we introduce first in software to make sure that's available in all of our platforms, including our software-based ones. But then, ideally, if we're looking at hardware, let's use a hardware card to mitigate the performance impact of doing it.
Just lovely. And yes, I do remember all of the offload cards and how a lot of them end up just getting acquired by the companies that they worked with and folded into the product line organically in a more organic kind of way. So yeah, all the names Fusion. We had Flash or PAM cards back in the day, like just all kinds of stuff. I don't remember the iSCSI one though. Was that just a specific Ethernet adapter that was like a target adapter for iSCSI?
It was. Now that's going way, way back, showing some age there. And a good example of, I should say, offload is not always a card too, right? We talk about our offload for compression, like our QAT offload. That's a prime example. That's something that probably would have been a card a few years ago, but now Intel's baked that just into the chipset. So it's not a card. It's just native part. And I think that happens a lot too, right? Is letting things start off as a card and then ultimately get pulled into the core chipset of the system.
Yeah, and for anybody, I mean, Intel's always been really good about it. QuickSync's the other one that comes to mind for encoding workloads and stuff like that natively in the CPU. Like, they've always been good about embedding, sort of auxiliary workloads within the CPUs like that. So I'm excited to see where this QAT stuff goes and how people take advantage of it and what sorts of workloads they generate with it.
The best part of that, and I know Chris probably talked about yesterday, but I'm most excited for it is the simplicity aspect, right?
Yeah.
I'm not turning nerd knobs, and you and I, we love.
It's kind of just there.
It just does it, right? Don't mess with it, right? It just does it. And I had somebody the other day ask me, well, what's the performance impact? I'm like, it's sort of moot, right? Like it's always there. All of the performance numbers we've ever quoted is with it fully enabled, right? There's no way of turning it off. So it's sort of it is the performance. It is what it is, and because it's a hardware offload, we're not introducing performance. It's not a bottleneck. Let's just say there's other things that'll bottleneck before that.
Are we exposing that anywhere in the analytics or the metrics or anything like that of the system performance that where people could see what QAT was offloading for them?
No, because it's just part of how ONTAP operates now. But the capabilities of that QAT chipset is you'll run into other data bottlenecks before that becomes the bottleneck, right? I think in a few of our slides, we maybe have quoted some Intel has a ridiculously high number of what kind of throughput that system can do. And your bottleneck is hard to find that much data to go through it.
Yeah. So I just, there's one comment in there, speaking of offload cards that Ollie put in, the Chelsea
there you go.
Adapter.
Yeah. Yep.
There you go. The TCP offload engine. Good call out there, Ollie. That's an old one. All right. So NVMe deallocate. NVMe I continue to be excited about it. I can't wait to do some more stuff. And speaking of which, like it's not just VMware. Like we've now officially, we can say we've got support documents out there for Proxmox. Proxmox has support for NVMe over TCP as well, guys. So I'm not sure about the deallocate thing. That's one thing I'm going to go check on. Just to make sure before we put it out there. But yeah, you can find it in the doc site, best practices for Proxmox using NVMe. So,
and our deallocate certainly isn't VMware only either. It's any application or any host that makes a deallocate call makes it possible.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So I'll check on the Proxmox forums and their guys. Considering it is open source, you can sort of go out there and find the information pretty easily. As far as that goes. But yeah, I think NVMe is going to continue to be a big thing. All right. I know this is one of your favorite topics.
This is the one we could go deep on. I'm excited for this.
We need to do like a super deep dive. Like who I know Justin Parisi used to do Flex Group. Who's the TME now for Flex Groups?
John Lance.
John Lance. Okay. Yeah, we'll have you and John come on and we'll just do a whole geek out hour on Flex Groups.
Would love to. And I just did a couple of blogs. Hopefully that they, hopefully get those posted or shared out. I just did a couple blogs because we've done so much in Flex Groups over the last few years. A lot of it gets missed. But this is sort of a culmination of a couple of years worth of work. And the real idea is we want flex groups to be as transparent as possible. And this is one of the it's one of the challenges of releasing something really early. It delivered huge value in flex groups, but there's a lot of things that had to be done manually early on, and we definitely took some customers for a ride as far as like, okay, you got to do this, but then you need to watch for this or be careful of that or make these adjustments. And sort of release by release, we've increasingly added in automation and intelligence to remove a lot of those things. And really, flex group volume should be as transparent as possible. They should something that you can deploy and not have to manage or maintain or worry about. And so we've introduced a bunch of things and we don't talk about them probably as much as we should. And so I think there's an awareness problem of some of the very cool things that flex group volumes can do.
Yeah, and Drew just threw a link to an article there from the community on how to do some migrations from traditional flex vols over to flex groups. So good shout out, Drew.
I did that, and hopefully, Drew, you can find there's another one I did specifically on some of these capacity management things and understanding how a flex group, how ONTAP decides where data should go in the flex group. And understanding it goes a long way to being easier to understand why it's making the decisions that it makes.
Yeah, so I did have a flex group question come in for you here from Aaron a little bit ago. What about LUNs? Have you ever planning to put LUNs in flex groups?
Theoretically it should work, right? I should be able to break up well, back up a little bit. It depends on how that question comes in. If I just placed a LUN in a different member volume in a flex group, there's sort of limited value in doing that. And part of what we're doing in the new ASAs, you'll see, is the ability for us to move LUNs seamlessly between multiple nodes. Now, if you're asking, hey, could I put a LUN in a flex group and break that LUN up across multiple? Now that gets a little more interesting. It's still sort of a challenge from actually the protocol standpoint to do that. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's not a high priority for us right now to do that particular element of trying to distribute a LUN across a flex group like that. Great
question, Aaron. We'll definitely keep an eye on that one. Alrighty, let me see. Did I get anything else come in here? Sebastian says reminiscent of ONTAP GX. Yeah, here you go. With the new features of flex groups, you beat vast data. Congrats. I was waiting for it to argue with competition. Yeah, that's a nice call. Thank you, Andre.
That's a great call out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's ONTAP has always had such a unique stance, right? As it straddles these sort of different worlds. You get some parallel file systems that insist on striping everything, which there's advantages to doing that, and then you have other challenges. So things like small file performance and metadata activity, those all struggle when you're dealing with highly striped, highly shared file systems. So that's why ONTAP makes these really, really intelligent decisions to say, well, where do I place files? I want to place the file in such a way that I still want to maximize things like small file performance and metadata things like lookups and searches, but I also want to make sure that this file system can grow immensely. And so that's why it does this very sophisticated choice of where to place things, which 99% of the time is totally fine. But there are scenarios where you need to be careful about where you place a file, in particular if that file becomes very large. Because what you don't want to do is to fill up one of these member volumes. Normally, just through the normal balance of things, through creation of directories and placing data, a flex group should balance itself out roughly, right? The idea is that you should never have the same capacity across all the member volumes. That's not the goal. The goal is to never fill up one of these member volumes. But if I'm suddenly shooting a 25 gig, 100 gig, terabyte, I've had one customer that regularly does 6 terabyte files, that is very hard for the member volumes to consume and actually not run into space issues. So 9.16.1 will identify when a file is growing beyond a certain level. Typically that 10 gigabytes is your cutoff level. It will actually segment the file across the member volume. So it'll switch what member volume that's in and start writing the next 10 gigabyte in the next member volume and repeat and distribute that as many times as required. And so the file actually becomes distributed across a number of member volumes. There are certain scenarios that's a performance gain, but more importantly, you never run into a scenario where you have a large file that is adversely affecting the capacity of a member volume.
How does this differ? So I hear you saying all of that, and in my head I'm going, that sounds like RAID. That sounds like striping. Are we doing like embedded software striping across volumes instead of like physical spindles or physical disk media?
No, and it was important distinction. We're not doing striping because that implies there's some sort of level of erasure coding. We're still
Sure.
relying on the disk to take care of it. Keep that at the RAID level. So we're not having to put in any extra overhead of, reassembling partitions. The other thing we're not doing is we're not segmenting every chunk of data. So quite often when you talk about thinking about software RAID or striping, when the data comes in, you will split every bit of data, and that's where you get into your small file performance problems or your metadata performance problems. This is a matter of thinking of it almost as a high watermark, where you fill up a jug, and it splits and it starts to fill up the next one, right? So I don't know if those water things, right? You fill up the one thing, and it starts to spill over to the next jug, and then once that one fills up, it spills over to the next one. That's really what it's doing. More of a waterfall approach. As the file grows, we'll just move segments over to the next volume and next volume and next volume.
Gotcha.
Now, where that can be beneficial is if that file is very large and you're using something like PNFS, then a PNFS client can actually make some really smart choices about where it accesses the data based on where the data is in a given file. But most importantly, this is just another mechanism where you're not having to worry about capacity on a flex group.
Wonderful. Yeah, somebody just a second ago, I saw it come in on YouTube. It's just not updating. Oh, yeah. Thomas said, it's been a minute since we've heard about infinite volumes. You remember that from about 10 years ago?
Yes.
And Andre said, that's such a great explanation. We hit this limit lately, and looking forward to 916. So it has a definite effect. The way that we're approaching this, the way that we're automating a lot of this stuff. I think as we're only going to get more storage, and the amounts and the capacities are only going to get bigger and bigger. There's a reason we put out 60 terabyte drives yesterday. There's a reason Western Digital and Seagate are already testing over 100 terabytes, 3.5 spindles. Like, the amount of data that's going to be generated by AI in the next 5 years is meant to eclipse everything we've created to this point combined.
Yeah.
And like the numbers are going to be staggering. So having this kind of capability, this waterfall method to be able to scale out just individual file systems.
Yeah.
Not just entire storage arrays, but like individual file systems that are being mounted to workloads and things like that for this kind of growth, for workloads that are using AI to generate data, is going to be monumental going forward. So I'm happy to see us ahead and out in front on this.
Well, and it's one of the best things. There was really two distinct architecture camps: one that did small file performance well, and one that did large file performance well.
Right.
And quite oftentimes in AI, you have this wild mix of the two. Your data set might be a series of small files, but you're having to deal with very large, vector databases or very large checkpoint files that need that large file performance. This is a really unique way that you don't need to make that choice. ONTAP will handle it accordingly and optimize whether you need small file performance or large file performance, and react accordingly.
There's this cycle, I need to illustrate it one day, that we go through in technology, and it's always like the CPU, the disk, and the network. And one of them is always playing catch up at some point in time, right?
Yep.
And if the CPUs and the networks get way ahead, it's always the disks that are kind of the laggard. But hey, no, we double the disk capacity. All of a sudden, CPUs are the ones behind, and they've got to catch up. So I feel like right now we're kind of in this sweet spot where we're getting like 400, 800 gig networking. We're getting 160 to 120 terabyte drives. We're getting these massive multi-core CPUs and SoCs and GPUs all at the time. We're getting all back into offload stuff. I don't know who's behind right now. It feels like everybody's kind of in a sweet spot and ahead of the curve right now. So it's exciting to be living through this era of technology for sure.
Let's you and I put something on the calendar for the new year and talk about some changes on ONTAP we're going to have to exactly address that cycle, because you're absolutely right. It does go in curves, but it's not every environment is struggling for CPU or disk, but some are. Like, it's, how do we make ONTAP even more flexible to be able to react accordingly and get that ratio exactly right, so you're not wasting resources, and get the performance blend you're actually looking for.
Well, I have committed to Mr. Baxter that I would do a session, since we announced it at Insight, on we would do an episode on the disaggregated storage, if that's the direction that you were headed in.
Without saying it, that's exactly what I was trying to do. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So we will definitely have that probably the beginning of the year, guys. We'll have Krish. Maybe you can come on and join us with Mr. Baxter, a friend of the show, will be on here. So we'll be doing a big showcase of all of the disaggregated storage stuff that was talked about at Insight once we get past the holidays.
That would be an entertaining episode. Those are three of probably the most sarcastic senses of humor in the company. I don't know. It could be interesting. That would be a fun. That'd be a fun panel.
I'm down for it. Let's do it.
I do want to throw a couple disclaimers here on this.
Okay.
So as much as I love this feature, and it's going to be GA. A couple disclaimers is ONTAP versions earlier than 9.16.1 won't have a hot clue of what these distributed files are. So one thing is turning this on means that you cannot then revert to an earlier version because 9.15 won't know what to do with those files. Likewise, replication becomes a challenge. You can't replicate to a version earlier than 9.16 because your earlier version of ONTAP won't know what to do with that. So that's one thing, is be careful of your replication topology if you turn this on.
Well, that's kind of a snap mirror golden rule anyway. You always want your destination to be a newer version than your source, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Second one is virtualization. Although VMDK files being very large on the surface might sound appealing for this, we haven't built in all of the VAI offloads and things like that into these types of files yet. And so virtualization is a no-go. We actually, ONTAP will block you from trying to turn on the copy offload and this advanced capacity balance. So that's the other one. That's a no-go is do not try to turn this on for virtualization environments.
Got it. I like keeping my data stores in separate volumes anyway.
Yes.
Keeps things organized.
Well, and there are vvols are being more increasing. With a vvol you can put together volumes to make it sort of do flex groupy type things anyway. So
yeah. Darth said seems like we need to start abstracting some of these things. It's kind of what flex group's doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of the point, I think.
Yep.
Thanks, Darth. Alrighty, where are we headed after flex groups? Or is anything else to go over here?
Let's kind of have a bit of a fun slide here, which is the reverse, which is flex group was taking a file and distributing it across multiple. Sort of an exciting new feature is we're introducing multi-part uploads for ONTAP S3. Specifically, we're in duality. So that's a mouthful. What that means is it's the API support for when an application has a very large object that it wants to upload into ONTAP S3 or into S3. It does it in multiple portions. So it breaks it up first and then uploads it simultaneously. So now I'm doing a sequential activity instead of just starting at the start of the object. So much faster upload speed. We've always supported it in ONTAP S3, but what's new in 9.16.1 is we also support it for volumes that we're doing file object duality. So it's a file share that we're exposing that out via S3. Why is that exciting? Well, this is one of the key capabilities for a lot of object applications. And so that means duality, this increases the range of support that we can support S3 applications in duality. And that is really something that is exploding for us, which is, we knew it would, it just took a little bit. The desire to be able to simultaneously share data out as object and file. And that means in this scenario here, I can ingest very large objects and then present it out as file. Now think about that. We're talking about AI again. There's a prime scenario where I can have a data collector that's writing via object into a data store and then turn around and present that object as a file to something like a GPU for extremely high performance. So a really exciting, bit of a subtle feature, but man, does it open up an interesting use case.
No kidding. And that, I mean, for anything for training, inferencing, and stuff like that, bringing stuff in from multiple sources, dumping them all into a giant data lake, S3 data lake, and then being able to process it with separate middleware and applications once it's in there via file, that is going to be massive in the coming years. Absolutely massive. Can I ask you a question real quick, positioning standpoint? As the product manager for ONTAP, how do you, when we talk about ONTAP S3, for my own knowledge and for the audience as well, how do you compare and contrast what they can do with ONTAP S3 versus when they should look at Storage Grid or vice versa? I'm going to put you on the spot. I got to ask.
We love answering that. It's a fair question. First off, I am one of a very large team of product managers for ONTAP. So just the disclaimer there.
Yeah, but you're the one that shows up on the show.
It
So
takes,
you're
it takes
it.
an army. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. So ONTAP and StorageGrid both do S3, but that's where the similarity sort of ends. They both have really unique niches. ONTAP, obviously we can start very, very small with, I can do a 5 terabyte bucket. StorageGrid has this incredible massive scale, but it starts pretty big. You're typically in the hundreds of terabytes where it makes sense to start with StorageGrid. ONTAP is incredibly high performance, really simple to manage, right? It's just create a bucket. It's just there's very, very little to manage and blindingly fast. StorageGrid has this rich ecosystem around being able to apply policies as far as where geographically should this data sit.
The ILM policies
to be available at multiple locations, the ILM policies, but also like geo awareness, like it's aware of 16 sites, and you can say, hey, I want this data in these 3 sites, but none of those other sites. And also from an API standpoint, ONTAP has some of the key S3 APIs, but by no means do we have all of the available S3 APIs. StorageGrid has a much richer set. So from an application compatibility standpoint, StorageGrid will have a wider set from a compatibility. There's overlap, but they're in such clear different lanes for most things. It's typically one or the other. And then obviously the duality, that's another trick that ONTAP has, is the ability to share across multiple protocols. So it is sometimes confusing where it seems like, oh, I compare, object and two, but the same can be said about E-Series and ONTAP, right? You both share block protocol. Why would you have two? Well, there's distinct swim lanes between the two of them. Same thing holds for ONTAP and StorageGrid.
Absolutely. I just wanted to get out there and let people understand. Since we spent a lot of time talking about AFFs and StorageGrid yesterday. We're going to have Ben back on to do more on StorageGrid soon. But I always like to hear the different perspectives, and I think the audience does as well. And I think it's good for them when they're thinking about how they lay out their storage infrastructure going forward, just to have these sorts of nuggets of value prop and positioning to know what to point in which direction, what data should go on what and why, and all of those things.
I will call out that ONTAP S3 is growing at a greater rate than the on-prem object market, which means that it's gaining share. Right, so it's
eating its own market share in a way.
Not necessarily, because StorageGrid is still growing well as well. So I think
is like S3 eating into the file and block market share of ONTAP? Are people transitioning over internally?
I possibly, but that's a hard change, right? For somebody to change what protocol you access the data on. But I think it's just a matter of increasingly there are more S3 based applications that are being adopted. And I think the fact that ONTAP can very easily support that, and it's already there, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, we can look at another storage platform, but I already have ONTAP. And man, I just turn on this S3 thing that's super easy to manage, and let's, hey, it works really well. So yeah, it is still doing very well and growing very fast.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All righty, where do we go from here, sir?
That is an excellent question. What have we not covered?
A lot of SVM mobility stuff.
Yes. I was gonna say we've done a lot.
I know Ollie's waiting patiently for his SVM migrate questions.
And it's getting late for Oliver too. That's the other thing. It is late in the day. A couple of things from Metro Cluster that we did, and that's where the SVM migration comes in. One is adding in you're talking about the spectrum of 3 things. Networking is definitely my weakest area, but I'll do my best to explain this. Adding in support for BGP, which is protocol used primarily for security purposes, making sure that, again, when we're tying switches together across 2 sites of a Metro cluster, we're doing that in the most secure way and also in a way that customers want to manage their networking environment. So a pretty key capability to make sure that inter-switch connection between sites is secure and stable.
Nice. Ollie, I'm going to pull your question up now.
Oh, he's got a question? Oh, no.
I got to scroll back up and find it real quick. Here we go. Let me do this real quick. It says, I only have a short question about mobility. Could I use SVM migrate to move data from MCC to a normal HA pair and then from the HA pair to another MCC?
Did I ever mention how much I like Oliver? Awesome individual. Yes, Oliver, you can do exactly that. New in 9.16, we can do exactly that, which is the ability, and you kind of want to think about this for a second. So if you're not familiar, SVM migrate is the ability to move the entire storage virtual machine. So that's the whole NAS namespace, right? So that's host name, that's permissions, that's files, the whole kit and caboodle, non-disruptively from one cluster to another, which means that in 9.16, I can pick up an SVM that's running on one Metro cluster, move it to an HA pair, so it's still online, and then move it back to another Metro cluster. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's a very, very easy way for me to do a tech refresh on Metro cluster. And in particular, if I want to go from a Metro cluster using Fiber Channel to a Metro cluster using IP. To do that normally is quite a challenge because I'm changing connection protocols. But this is a great way of being able to do that non-disruptively. I basically can leave my data in place, build my other Metro cluster, test it, harden it, burn it in, and then when I'm ready, do this hop of SVM mobility to move it from one to now. I can't go from Metro cluster to Metro cluster yet. I go a Metro cluster to an HA pair and then HA pair back to a Metro cluster. So it's a 2-hop process, but absolutely I can do that for a non-disruptive tech refresh.
Fantastic. Ollie, I hope that answered your question. It's a really good one. It's good for people to know that kind of stuff's possible when using Metro cluster.
And for the record, Ollie did not have access to my slides. He didn't know that was the next bullet I had on that slide. So that was...
What?
That was...
It is! Look at that! He said that's exactly what I hope to hear. Thank you, Keith. Thanks, Ollie. Now go to bed. It's really late.
It is, exactly. So I scratched the surface on a lot of these, Nick, but those are the highlights. Now, check the release notes. There's a bunch of other little Easter eggs that are in there for tweaks here and there, but those are the big items for sure.
Well, it's definitely the combination of yesterday and today is a huge payload. It's a big haul, and part of me understands now why we didn't try to do it at Insight. Because there was a lot of stuff to announce. And yes, we focused on the ASA and all of the changes and things that we're doing to ONTAP and Block and bringing Block back through the renaissance that it's going through right now. In my opinion, that's me, not NetApp, saying that. But I think it was looked over for a long time, and it allowed some other players to creep in. And they went, "Hey, we do Block. We've been doing it since 2003. You guys remember?" So I think having the ASAs, highlighting some of the use cases, the work we're doing with NVMe is really going to highlight that. I think NVMe is going to take over the world in the next 3 years. There's I'll give it to you early, one of my hot 2025 predictions. You heard it here first in November. You guys will have that video out in the next couple of months. But one of my hot predictions for 2025 is that within the next 2 to 3 years, NVMe is pretty much going to take over the world. Because of the efficiency, because of the performance. We're kind of outgrowing SAS a little bit we've kind of just hit up against that glass ceiling. We can't push it much more. Physics won't let us do it. So we need something bigger, better, faster. And I think NVMe is going to be that. So that's the things that we're doing are all good things. And the things that you guys are adopting are all good things, whether it's block object or file. It doesn't matter. You can all do it all on all of our systems. So, Keith, any final thoughts you want to leave before we get wrapped up here? I'm looking to make sure we don't have any. Here's a good call out from Andre. MCC is mandatory in Europe. Make it happen in 9/17.
Message received. We'll see what we can do.
There you go. Hey, there's your commitment, Andre. You heard it here first from the product manager. Yeah. There you go. Can we do SVM migration for block protocols as well? Good question.
It's tricky. Block switches and how block networking just doesn't really like suddenly having a LUN appear on ports and they weren't on previously, right? So it's a challenge. Now that's not to say that we won't have a methodology to move LUNs around in the future. So it probably won't manifest itself as a way of an SVM because the idea of a host name doesn't really apply in the block world, right? What we're looking for is a non-disruptive movement of LUNs, snap your active thing maybe at a greater scale. So not out of the realm of reason, but not likely to appear in the form of an SVM.
Yeah, good question. I don't think it's ideal to try and do that. I think some of the ways you were describing about how you could use ActiveSync in place of that, or as an alternative, is a much safer way to do an SVM migration, but to do it with ActiveSync. So I'm not sure we're ever going to get to the point where this is a good idea, much less possible. Because what's the Jeff Goldblum thing? Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
In the NAS world, I can bounce a MAC address to a different port, and the switch figures it out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Most block switches don't like that very much.
Let me see. Any other questions here? Let's see. Dan said NetApp block is the best block. Thank you, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
Great stuff. All right. Thank you guys very much for all the questions and for keeping those coming in. Hint, Mr. Aasen here does hang out in our Discord community. So even though we're getting ready to wrap up the show here, were you to continue to have follow-up questions, if you were to @ him in the on-air chat channel or in any channel, I'm sure he would love to come and answer any further questions that you guys have. But Keith, as always, it's been a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for always being a good sport and being willing to do these. And thanks for keeping me honest on a lot of these things as well. I know we wanted to do this one back in August or September when we were first talking about ONTAP 916. But I'm glad we did this today instead of trying to squeeze it into Insight, because it's so much stuff. Guys, this isn't even the full payload. Like, I'm going to link you guys the release notes in Discord and in the description here of the video in case you're watching this later. But the payload of this 916 release is massive. Keith just hit the big bullets.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I would like to say that was like, ooh, we're all taking a break now, but
nope,
you haven't seen anything yet. Next 2025, here's my prediction. 2025 will be one of the richest years for innovation at NetApp, maybe ever. It's, this year was a bunch of new things, but I'll tell you, next year is going to be wild.
Damn. Okay, well, there you go. I thought the last 2 years were pretty wild. C-Series, ASA, new A-Series with PCIe Gen 5, ONTAP every 6 months. Some reason people are still running 9.8 and 9.9. I can't figure out why. Seriously, like the new stuff that's coming out here is incredible, guys. Even if it's just to turn on ransomware protection for your volumes, please get updated. Even if you have to start on a lower tier system, please get updated. Please don't sit back there on 9.8, 9.9, 9.7 anymore. Please get updated. One last final question I'll ask you. What were the systems that maybe got kicked out with 9.16 that maybe new enough that people should be concerned about, if any?
None. That's the cool thing. If it could run 9.15, it can run 9.16. So we only added.
There you go.
Those are never fun to do. It has to happen. Inevitably, you get to a point where there's a hardware limitation, where you can't run the newer version of software on the old piece of hardware. But we don't like doing that. We do everything we can to try to maintain as many platforms, because I know that puts people in a bad spot where they want to run a newer version and can't, especially when you're launching new systems that can only run the newer version of ONTAP, and they have to coexist, right? You never want to get in that scenario. So we try to avoid that when we can.
Yeah. Sebastian, I'm not sure what to tell you here.
They're resilient. They're durable.
You know what? There are 3140s still out there running the world from 2008. I'm serious. Like, there were some beast boxes in the late 2000s, early 2010s, man. That before the old 7 mode stuff is still out there kicking ass. We know because we have the auto supports. Yeah, they're still out there. Yeah. It's fantastic. Well, Keith, as always, it was a pleasure. I'll keep you posted on the disaggregated episode, what we end up getting scheduled around 2 of our VPs as far as getting that conversation going. But we definitely want to try and do that one soon.
Let's take suggestions from your viewers, too, around what that episode should be called. I think that could be a fun episode name, right? That's
what should be called?
What that disaggregated episode should be called. I think there's lots of fun wordplay that you could have an episode name there, which is...
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Keith. We'll see you next time, man.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye. Well, there you have it, guys. Day 2 of this week's launch event in the books. As always, Keith Aasen, thank you so much for your time and always bringing the good energy to the show here. I know the fans love it, and the audience loves it. So tomorrow we're going to get a little bit nerdier, all right? Tomorrow, I know today was a little nerdy. We're going to go in down to the deep end tomorrow because we're bringing in one of our lead data scientists from our R&D division, Mesvin Dima, to talk directly about how autonomous ransomware protection with artificial intelligence, or ARPAI, works in these new versions of ONTAP. Okay? So bring your propeller hats tomorrow. I'm not kidding, because we're going to spin them. And we're going to talk really deep about how ARP goes in and detects all of these malicious things to protect you and your systems. Don't forget to come join us in Discord. We got lots of more episodes upcoming throughout the rest of the year. And then I believe next week we have... we're bringing back another friend of the show, Mr. Chance Bingen, to give an update on the ONTAP tools for VMware with some updates from ONTAP 9.16. Couldn't get him in this week. He's out doing a thing. But we got him lined up for next week. So stay tuned. We got a big schedule for the rest of the year. So hope you guys are excited. Can't wait for you guys to come hang out with us in Discord and do all the community stuff. But until next time, take care.